To start with, my parents have always taught me to be very independent. I live 30-ish minutes away from New York City by train, so I was taught not to be afraid of the subway systems. I learned very quickly how to find my own way around New York City and my town in Jersey via public transportation. I always checked in with my parents as well, whether I was going to practice or to a movie with my friends. It didn't really matter. I made sure to always check in, so it was never really a big deal. Anyway, a few weeks prior to the incident I'm about to talk about, the internet in our house was not working. I needed the computer to finish a research paper. Since the library was closed, it was a weekend, so this was typical of my town. My older brother took me to this internet cafe a few blocks away from our house. While there, my brother was talking to his friend Charles and introduced us both to each other. Well, little did I know that this Charles guy, who was only about 17 years old, was about to shortly save my life. Oh, I almost forgot an important detail. The cafe was on the main street of my town, and there was a bus stop about a block away from it. A few weeks after meeting Charles, my friends invited me to go bowling in the city with them. My parents said it was fine. I was 14, so obviously I still had to ask for permission to go into the city alone. I was well on my way around noon. We bowled, grabbed some pizza, talked about my friend's new puppy, all the typical girl things. Everything was actually going really great. That was until I started making my way back home. At 3 p.m., there were some delays with the subway system. Instead of waiting it out there, I decided to try and take a different subway home. It would drop me off at the Newark Penn station, and I would be one bus ride away from my home. No problem. Just a little detour. At 3:15 p.m., I got on that subway when I noticed an older man staring at me. It creeped me out, but that was nothing new in New York City. I simply tried my best to ignore him. At 3:50 p.m., though, I arrived at Newark Penn station, and this man saw me get up to go. He made eye contact with me and smiled, then hurried to catch up behind me. Mind you, I was a young, small girl at this time, so I was a very easy target. He was being creepy, so I walked fast and tried to get lost in the crowd. The doors opened and I weaved my way in between people. This dude must have had like 40/40 vision or something, because as soon as I arrived at my bus stop, I turned around only to see he was still right behind me. 4-ish p.m., I'm sitting next to an elderly-looking lady at the bus stop. The creepy dude was now pacing back and forth, about 10 feet away from me. He was looking at me unblinking, pacing back and forth. Every part of my body was saying, "Run now. This man is bad news." Still, though, there was nowhere for me to go. At least sitting next to this kind older lady made me feel a little bit safer. I took my phone out to text my mom, only to realize it was dead. Wonderful. Thankfully, more people had now arrived at the stop, and I felt a lot better. There were now a lot of witnesses around. The man couldn't do anything, but he was still staring and pacing back and forth. At 4:15 p.m., the bus arrived finally. I quickly rushed in and sat as close as possible to the driver. I don't know why I didn't tell the bus driver what was happening. I guess I was young, scared, and naive, and didn't want to burden the driver with knowing this. Stupid. I know that now. My stop was the very last one, so I was thinking to myself, well, this guy has got to get off the bus before me. There's no way he's going to stay on till the very end just to follow me. Many stops later, the man was still on the bus. He was also doing this very creepy thing. Whenever the bus stopped, he would observe if I was going to get up with everyone else, and then when I stayed, instead of getting off the bus, he would scoot closer and closer to the front where I was. There were fewer and fewer people on, and I realized this guy was going to get off whenever I did. This meant that if I got off at my real stop, he would simply follow me home, find out where I lived, or maybe I'd never get home in the first place. At 5 p.m., there were now only 2 stops separating my house and I. This guy, a single lady, and I were the last ones inside the bus. I decided I was going to get out early, because there was no way I was going to let this guy know where I lived. I got off a stop early. He saw and followed me right away. I did my best to pick up speed, but he easily kept pace with me. I started running, only for him to start running after me. In my panic, I suddenly remembered that cafe. It would be closing soon, but I was only a single block away. I ran for my life to the cafe, with the guy right on my tail. As I was approaching, I saw Charles standing outside, just happening to be in the middle of locking up the place. He took one look at me and knew there was something wrong. I guess he could see the fear in my face and the older man running after me. I rushed over to Charles, who immediately pushed me inside the cafe and locked the door behind us. Luckily, he was fast on his feet, and the creep had been locked outside. My heart was pounding. I told Charles this random man had been following me across 3 different towns, and I was extremely scared. He called the cops. The man was just staring inside the cafe. I was staring back at him, now protected by the locked yet clear glass door. I had to remember all his details. The creepy dude stared and smiled for a minute, then simply walked away as if nothing had ever happened. Little did me or the man know that Charles' uncle was a cop in our town. A few minutes later, the cops rushed in force. After describing the vivid details of the man, it only took them a minute to catch this creep still walking down Main Street. We later found out this creepy guy had a warrant out for his arrest for armed robbery and had prior accounts of sexual assault as well. Had it not been for Charles that day, I don't know what would have happened to me. I was really grateful to him for saving my life, and no, this did not deter me from public transportation or exploring the city alone. My parents did freak out a bit, of course, and bought me some mace and a taser. As an adult, I now travel all over the world. Sometimes alone, but I'm always hyper aware of my surroundings, all because of what that man did at 14 years old. I do have a story to tell, but it's not something that happened to me. It's something that actually happened to our neighbors back when we lived in Highgate in London. So I myself wasn't scared for my own safety, but all the neighbors were scared for the family this was happening to, if that makes sense. Also, I've changed the man's name because my mom reckons that his parents would probably never talk to us again if they knew I told this story. Anyway, their son was taking a gap year before he went to uni, and he ended up going off to Thailand for a few months during the summer. His parents kept in touch with him, of course, and he seemed to be having quite a lot of fun. Then, one day out of the blue, they got a phone call from some random guy from Thailand. He asked them something like, "Are you Rob's parents?" Obviously, they said yes. He told them that Rob had been kidnapped. If they contacted the police, they were going to torture and kill him, and if they didn't pay them within a set time limit, they were also going to torture and kill him. Not just that, they were going to feed his body to crocodiles, or sharks, or whatever else. Basically, so they'd never have a piece of him to bury. Pretty grim stuff, right? So Rob's mom was basically ready to get the money together right away. Anything to keep these guys from hurting Rob. His dad got in touch with the Thai consulate and got the police involved. This caused absolute murder with the couple, no pun intended. There were some nights you could hear them screaming at each other in the kitchen, with Rob's mom screaming out, "You've killed him! You've killed our son!" I mean, it got really intense. Just to let you know, it all ended up basically okay, and thankfully Rob was not seriously injured. But get this. Rob's dad kept telling the kidnappers that he was having trouble sending the money over to the account they'd given him, as his bank kept flagging the transaction for fraud. He acted like he was more than willing to send everything, but he was just having trouble getting it over. That way he could buy more time for the Thai police to track the phone calls and bank account number to the person they needed to arrest. In the end, Rob's parents got another phone call from the Thai police, telling them Rob had been found safe and sound, but that he'd been arrested for fraud or scamming charges or something. As insane as this might sound, it turned out Rob was never actually in any danger. He wasn't in some chicken wire cage or handcuffed to a bloody radiator or whatever. He was actually in on the scam himself. Long story short, he'd run out of money while over there and was too ashamed to ask for more. Instead, he turned to some locals who had a proposition for him. Pretend to be kidnapped, pose for a proof of life picture, and then split the ransom money 50-50 with these so-called kidnappers. Turns out it was a proper little industry where he was staying, and horrible little toe-rag backpackers would scam their own parents and each other's out of thousands of pounds at a time. The exchange rate is massive between Thailand's and most of European and American currencies. So the kids would always be like, it's only a few £100 in our money or whatever, and then they just let them go. Then the ungrateful buggers got a few more weeks of traveling with money from their parents. I might have mentioned I don't live next to this family anymore, but as you can imagine, this caused a huge rift between the kid and his parents. I'm pretty sure it's one that's still not healed properly. I totally understand why, too. He put them through torture, all just because he was greedy and too proud to ask for more money for himself. So I work at a pizza place, usually inside, as my insurance does not cover claims when driving for business. Occasionally, I will cover a delivery shift for one of the drivers though, because the money is pretty good. The delivery area includes a few new developments, upper middle-class cookie-cutter neighborhoods, an older 1940s Arab village, 2 apartment complexes, some trailer parks, and a bunch of more rural areas. Not exactly to the point of seeing hundreds of stars at night or anything, but enough that you couldn't hear your neighbors if they were to yell. About a week ago, I was covering for one of these shifts. I come back to the shop feeling pretty good. I was averaging $5 a delivery, and they'd all been pretty close as well. I checked to see if we had any more outgoing deliveries. All of a sudden, I saw an address I had never seen before. We mostly only had regular customers, so an address that didn't seem the least bit familiar was somewhat out of the ordinary. It was out on one of those more rural roads. I asked the kid who'd taken the order what was up, because there was a special instruction on the ticket as well. He said the person who called said to go around back because the front door, I guess, was inoperational for some reason. Okay, well, that wasn't uncommon. People often want you to go around the back. Either they're painting the front door, the house has shifted and it's a bitch to open, or they just like hanging out in their backyard, whatever. So, as I'm driving out to this house, I get an odd feeling. I really didn't like the idea of going to the back of some house, way out in the sticks. It would be all too easy for some thugs to order a pizza to an abandoned house. There are quite a few of those in the more rural areas. Then they'd jump the delivery guy, obviously. I figured I'd scope the place out a bit when I got there first. If it seemed too sketchy, I'd just call them and make up some bull about how it's against company policy to go around the back of houses to prevent robberies. As I'm driving up, I realize it's toward the end of this road that gets less and less populated the further down you went. Great. I was pretty near the address now, and I started to slow down. I came upon this house, an abandoned-looking building set up from the road with no address and surrounded by a bunch of trees. I thought to myself, this house better not be it. I drive past and check the next house's address, and lo and behold, the abandoned-looking one with no number seemed to be the right house. Well, fuck this. At this point, I was not super worried though. Out in the boonies, the standards of houses are pretty low, so a house in disrepair is not too unusual. I doubled back to this house and pulled into the driveway. I started getting bad vibes immediately. Something didn't feel right. I parked my car at the very end of the driveway, with the rear of the car on the shoulder, so anyone passing by could very clearly see it. At this point, I called back into the shop and told them the house was very sketchy. If I didn't call back in 4 minutes to call me, if I didn't answer to call the cops. While I was on the phone, I took a chance to observe the house a little bit closer. I could see now that it looked extremely abandoned, not just in disrepair. The driveway itself was disintegrating. There were weeds growing out of the gravel. No mailbox, no trash can, no car, no landscaping, no toys, absolutely nothing in the yard. It looked like it hadn't been mowed in years. With a closer look, I could see the roof was falling apart and the siding was falling apart as well. The back deck, which came around to the side, had almost disintegrated completely. The only part of the house that looked even a little bit decent was the allegedly non-functioning front door. The windows were all closed shut and all had the blinds and curtains drawn as well. A few were actually boarded up. I couldn't even see any electrical wiring running to this house. It wasn't dark completely, but it was dusk. There were no signs of any lights around. I was starting to get very nervous. I'm a 5'10" male and 180 pounds. I'm not in super great shape, but I'm not a complete wimp either. I'm not helpless, but I do try to avoid any sort of confrontation. I wasn't too concerned about getting robbed. No skin off my teeth. That's not my money anyway. I mean, I'd rather not, sure. What I was mostly worried about was getting jumped and killed. It was a fairly safe area, but recently there had been some more rather unsavory people moving in from the city. A big spike in home invasions and robberies. Even more worrying, a few stabbings and assaults as well. It was time to either nut up or shut up, though. I was not about to go charging in there like a fool, so I got out my phone and called the number they'd given when ordering. While I was doing that, I was also getting the pizza out and making sure to leave my door open. A running car half in the road and an abandoned house with the door wide open looks really suspicious, right? If shit went down, at least it would look out of place enough to make someone stop. Not that there was any traffic this far down the road. I was starting to walk up to the house as the phone continued to ring. It rang twice, and then an automated message started to play. This number is associated with an internet texting app. The free ones you download that let you send free text from a different phone number over a data connection. I think it was Haywire or something. We'd had issues with people using numbers from those services for pranks in the past. This was a huge red flag. My heart was pounding in my throat, and my whole body was telling me to bail. Still, I didn't want to get a reputation of being a flaky driver and lose any potential for future delivery shifts. That's why I'd not bailed yet. I'm just standing there holding the pizza, looking at this house but not daring to venture around the back. I was hoping the resident would look out the window and come out by the road to get their food. I'm looking in through the front windows, checking for any signs of life. At this point, I see a blind pop up on one window next to the front door, and a really creepy-looking guy with a hat pulled over his face and huge sunglasses looking out. There was no reason for him to be wearing those. I could see a big guy standing right behind him in the room, too. When he saw me looking, he mouthed something and darted away, presumably toward the allegedly broken front door. At this point, I got the fuck out of there. I had stayed close to my car, so it was only a few steps away. I jumped into the driver's seat and threw the pizza into the passengers. That was something I would never really do, since I was really anal about keeping my car clean. I slammed into reverse before I even got the clutch all the way in. I grinded my gears a little, again something I never did without looking. I simultaneously slammed and locked my door and floored it backwards onto the main road. I didn't even check for cross traffic, really stupid on my part. I started to drive away and looked back toward that house. The screen door on the outside of the front door was now open, but the front door was still shut. The guy wasn't out in the yard yelling or anything. He'd seemingly just disappeared. I pulled over a little ways up the road and called back to the shop. I told them I was fine, and I'd tell them everything else when I got back. Those people never called back to inquire about their food. People will usually call irate if the pizza's 15 minutes late. These people never got it at all, so it's really strange they never called. Pretty much a confirmation they were up to no good. After telling the coworkers about it, we concluded it was definitely a robbery at the very least. We put the address and phone number on our no deliveries list, and we all shared the pizza together. Now, I doubt I would have gotten murdered or anything like that. Robbed maybe, a gun pulled with a little roughing up, sure, but it was still very unnerving. I easily could have gotten into some serious trouble just by doing my job, especially if the idiots took a slightly less abandoned house to stake out. So I'm a pizza delivery girl. Easy enough. I was at work around 9:30 p.m. when this guy called in using a very whispery, breathy voice. I did my usual. "Thank you for calling Pizza Hut. This is Karen. How are you doing tonight?" After the usual exchange of small talk, I found out he was ordering for delivery. He was a new customer, so I had to put in all of his information fresh. I didn't notice anything weird initially. He told me he had a coupon for a pizza and asked if I could give him the discount. I told him I had to grab my manager so we could take care of that for him. He asked for me specifically to take care of him after I came back from dealing with my boss. I discounted him for his coupon and he thanked me. Here's where it started to get weird. He stopped me mid-sentence and told me I had a very nice-sounding tone of voice and he just loved to hear me talk. "You should be a disc jockey," he said. I was a little bit weirded out, but I tried to stay professional. I told him that was very sweet of him, and I would consider it in the future. "I'd listen to your radio station. Thank you for taking my order tonight. I'll stop by your store and see you sometime soon, Karen." I wish I could say that was the end of it, but that isn't true. I noted that this man lived in an apartment complex. What I didn't realize is I'd taken his complex's address and not his individual apartment number. Not 5 minutes later, the man called back and my coworker Bob answered the phone. I learned after the fact that he had asked for me by my full name. I picked up the phone and did my usual greeting, and he reminded me that I'd forgotten to ask his apartment number. I changed the information for him, but before I could hang up, this was our conversation. "Hey, Karen." "Karen?" Yes, sir. How can I help you?" "Are you doing all right?" "Yeah, I'm great." "Good. I'm gonna hang up now. See you soon." Bob had heard the whole story and told my boss to have my male coworker take the call instead of me. When Bob came back, the very first thing he said to me was that the man had been asking where I was the entire time. Okay, so I get there, right, and I knock on the door, and he says in this weird voice, "Come in." I'm not about to go into this random guy's house, though, so I knocked again, and he opened the door with this big smile on his face. When he saw it was me, though, it just dropped instantly. I greeted him, and he said, "Oh, where's Karen?" I told him you weren't going to be able to make it, and he got so angry. After I took his money and gave him his food, he asked how you were. I told him you were doing all right, and he just said, "Good. Karen is a sweet girl. Tell her I'll see her soon." And the fact that he asked the driver to come inside and that he was expecting me really creeps me out. Maybe he's just a lonely guy who wants someone to talk to, but still, I'm gonna add one more creep to my list. A few years ago, me and a few friends went to Russia for a Christmas vacation. First thing we did after such a long flight was head out to a bar. We started trying out the different flavors of vodka. When it was our turn to get drinks, we started to try to speak Russian, but the bartender immediately smiled at us and asked, "American?" Turns out his English was really good, so we replied to him in English. "Yep, we're American. Don't hold it against us, please." He just laughed and made a peace sign with 2 fingers, then asked what we were doing in Russia. I told him we were on vacation, then asked him for 5 shots of the chili vodka. 2 European guys at the bar started talking to my friends and I, and suggested playing the I Never game. Both of the guys were bragging, saying how much they could drink and how pretty we all were. They even joked that since there were no boys with us, they should pretend to be our boyfriends to keep all the creeps away. We excused ourselves to the bathroom. Then, instead of finding generic male and female toilets, we were greeted with just one individual bathroom. When we looked inside, we found ourselves staring in on 5 guys, all dressed in suits and sitting down at a small table. They straight away turned their heads towards us and said something quickly in Russian. That's when I noticed guns laying on the table. which they were pointing at us. "Oh, I'm so sorry, we were just trying to find the toilets," I remember saying. We tried to make a quick getaway. Another guy kind of did a half smile and said in perfect English, "I'm sorry for my friend here, but the real toilets are the way you came. I could show you if you like." My friend Deb, now holding my hand, slowly edged backwards to where we came from. "Thank you, but I'm sure we can find it on our own. We just wanted to get the hell out of there." We shakily left that area and were soon engulfed by people once again. We went back to the bartender and explained we couldn't find the toilet and we'd nearly gotten shot while trying to do so. I explained how the guys looked and that it was very odd that there wasn't anyone else but them in there. "Oh, that's fine, don't worry about those guys," said the bartender. So who are they?" "Oh, they're the local mafia, nothing to worry about. Another vodka for you?" My friends and I were just standing there with our mouths open after hearing that. I wanted to leave and go to the hotel bar. How could this bartender be so casual and laid back about this? I know it might not seem like much of a story to everyone else, but who can honestly say they nearly got shot by some Russian mafia guys in the bathroom? Two weeks ago, I was home alone when the doorbell suddenly rang. I asked who it was, and the person outside called out, "Oh, it's pizza delivery." I hadn't ordered a pizza. When I looked out to peek at the person, they were indeed carrying a pizza box with them, but something about them was off. They didn't have a uniform or any other paraphernalia, or even a pizza bag. I didn't even see a car outside. I told the person I didn't order any pizza, and he left in a hurry. I peeked out my window once again and saw him now across the street at my neighbor's home. I didn't really think anything of it at the time, since I thought maybe they were the ones who'd ordered the pizza and he'd simply mixed up the address or something. I went back to what I was doing, which was playing video games at the time, I believe. Well, as it turns out, the guy robbed my neighbors that night. Pretty scary stuff. I probably could have stopped that if I'd called the police. But in the moment, I wasn't really thinking too deeply about it. Now that I take note of it after though, in hindsight, he was carrying a Little Caesars box with him, which is pickup only. Right outside my apartment, smoking a cigarette, an unknown person snuck around a corner and sprayed me with pepper spray while I was looking down at my phone. I could make out a tall, thin man with a backpack rushing away with his hands in his pockets before I lost the ability to keep my eyes open altogether. There were no other people on the sidewalk in either direction. I hadn't seen the man's face. He didn't say a single word or try to take anything from me or grab me. He didn't even stick around to watch me be messed up. He just sprayed me in my eyes and walked away like nothing ever happened. I'm thankful I was able to feel for my keys and get back into my building. I started to realize that I could very easily have permanent damage if I couldn't wash this out of my eyes fast. I couldn't even find the key to my studio. That's how blind I was. I was starting to not be able to breathe. I rushed up the stairs and pounded on every door I could feel until my neighbor, who I'd never met before this moment, opened up the door for me. She let me into her bathroom and tossed water on me everywhere. I felt so terrible for just commandeering her space and bringing that horrid smell into her home. I'll be eternally grateful to that woman, though, for helping me and calling the police. They never found the guy. I'm wondering if this was just random or if this guy was waiting for me in particular. I still have no idea why he did that to me. So I spend most of my summers in Australia, helping out on my uncle's farm. In the family, it's just him, my female cousin who's never home because of ballet school, and my male cousin. My brother and I were there last summer when I was 14. I got up in the morning and walked into the kitchen, seeing a dude underneath the computer desk. "Oh, he's just fixing the computer, don't mind him. He'll be done in about an hour or so." my uncle told me. My brother and my cousin had gone surfing, while my uncle was going to pick something up from the store. I was getting weird vibes from this bloke I'd just been left alone with. He kinda vaguely looked like the guy from Smash Mouth, but with a patchier beard and much thinner hair. He kept on tinkering away at the computer, and I silently slinked back down the hall. I wanted some privacy. I opened my female cousin's bedroom door and walked in. I put her music on softly and left after I slammed the door. I then crept down the hall a little more into my cousin's room. I rolled underneath his bed and started messaging back and forth with my boyfriend back home. I let my boyfriend know what was happening. I was still weirded out because I'm inherently suspicious of any man or woman I don't know. We were making jokes to calm me down about him flying down here and beating this random repairman up. That was when I began to hear footsteps echoing down the hall. The bathroom was right next to the computer, and the only thing down here was all of our bedrooms. What could he possibly want here? I heard my female cousin's door open and him skulking about inside. Since she had a laminate floor, I could hear him walking around. Her bathroom door creaked open. I heard him pull it open and begin searching around, then eventually leave the room. He was definitely looking for something or for someone. My cousin's door then creaked open, and I heard him step inside the room I was currently hiding in. Thankfully, my cousin had a lot of shit under his bed, so the man was not able to find me. The man was muttering to himself as he opened the bathroom, the closet, and even searched under the dresser. Then he left again, walking all around the house. I was definitely freaked out at this point, but it started to get way worse. A car pulled up outside out of nowhere. It didn't have the familiar sound of my uncle's truck either. All of a sudden, the man's phone rang, and he picked it up. "Nah, man, I can't find her. I think she left or something." There was a brief pause as I began to furiously message my boyfriend, thoroughly and utterly spooked. Fine, but they're gonna be back any minute, so you gotta move fast." I couldn't believe this was happening. A bunch of people entered the house. I couldn't tell how many footsteps I heard, but I learned later it was 2 different sets. Stupidly, I rolled out from under the bed so I could grab the phone on my cousin's nightstand. I couldn't use mine because it was a Canadian phone, and fuck roaming charges, you know? I was about to dial 911 when I had that sudden realization. Oh fuck, man, I'm in a different country. What's the number for the police? Basically, I'm holding this pizza-shaped phone, thinking, oh shit, when 3 men walk into the room. "More repair guys?" I asked them, trying very hard to play dumb. At this moment, my boyfriend was messaging me like mad because I just sent him a text about to call 911. I might die, so if I do, delete my internet history for me. I hadn't messaged him back since. I was holding that phone, looking pale and shaky. That obviously is not good, because they knew I knew what they were up to. They filed into the room, and I've never been more glad to hear. "What the fuck are you doing?" My brother rushed in soaking wet, holding a surfboard and looking very menacing. These dudes were all cornered as hell. They started making excuses, and by the time their sorry asses were done trying to explain why they'd trapped a scared-looking teenage girl in a bedroom all alone, my overprotective uncle showed up, holding a bag of milk and some frozen curly fries. He flipped his shit and began beating them with the fries. Long story short, I almost got terrorized by 3 older men. But in the end, thanks to my brother and uncle, they ended up looking like a child with purple and red crayons that gotten bored and drawn all over them. I wanted to tell you the story of a friend of mine named Angel. Angel is 19 and was honestly one of the brightest, cleverest, and most bubbly people I've ever met. She was obsessed with true crime stuff. She loved that TV program CSI and wanted to join the police so she could get into the forensic side of investigations. She loved the idea of using science to catch horrible criminals, but we never thought she'd end up being the victim of one herself. She had everything going for her in life, but then she met her ex-boyfriend Jay, and we saw a change in her right away. Jay made everything about him, and he abused Angel physically and mentally until she made everything about him too. She was miserable with him, but kept talking like he was just a tortured soul who needed a girl like her in his life to help fix him. We had to intervene time and time again to get her to see what a scumbag he was, who'd never be good for anyone. He was only ever interested in himself. It took ages to do this, but we finally managed to convince her to leave him. She told us all in a group chat that she'd finally told him they couldn't be together anymore. We were all so proud of her, but she also said that she was terrified of something he'd do to get back at her for this. As much as we knew that her dad, Patty, would never let anything happen to her while she was under his roof, we knew that he also couldn't protect her all the time. We knew that Jay was terrified of Patty himself, as they'd almost gotten into fights a few times before. Patty was way bigger than Jay and could easily beat the life out of him if it came to it, so he always stayed away from the house, just not far enough. I remember the day we found out that Angel was in the hospital. We were all hoping it wasn't anything serious. But then we heard she'd been hurt in a very serious incident. She'd fallen out of a van that was going down the highway somehow. We all just knew Jay had something to do with it. As it turns out, Jay had recruited the help of one of his friends. They'd waited in a van near Angel's house, waiting for her to come out. When they spotted her, Jay ran out, picked her up, then carried her to the van and threw her into the back of it. We still don't know what exactly went on inside that van. He insisted in court that he hadn't just thrown her out, but whatever he was doing or saying, it had scared Angel so much that she somehow found a way to open the back doors as it was running down the highway. She must have thought her only chance of survival was jumping out the back of that van. Some people say Jay pushed her out the back as a way to kill her, but at his trial, his lawyers were somehow able to prove that he had not pushed her, and all he wanted to do was keep her inside the van. He must have admitted to wanting to kidnap or scare her into getting back with him, but I know Angel. She wouldn't have done something so drastic without being scared for her life. What happened next made it clear to me that the justice system in this country is just completely broken, because the sentence he got was nothing of what he deserved to get. Recently, he got his sentence more than doubled after a big public campaign headed up by her parents. That's all good and everything, but it still feels like nothing, because Angel's life is basically over now. She suffered serious head trauma after falling and being pushed from the back of the van, and now doctors think she'll be potentially disabled for the rest of her life. We don't know if she's ever going to walk, talk, or eat by herself ever again. Basically a death sentence. But the sentence Jay originally was going to get? Just over 4 years. Can you even believe that? This guy kidnapped his girlfriend, might have actually thrown her out the back of a van going 60 miles per hour, basically ended her life, and he was going to get out of prison in just 4 years. That's nothing. The driver of the van basically didn't get punished at all, and he also deserves to be in prison for the rest of his life. Angel once told me about a law in America where if someone dies while you're committing a crime, your charge automatically gets turned into murder. I personally think we should have something like that here too. It would make people think twice about doing things like kidnapping or drunk driving or anything that could end up ruining someone else's life. This happened 2 years ago now, but honestly, it feels like just yesterday that we found out Angel's life was over. This happened when I was about 14 years old. I had just started babysitting for a family in my neighborhood. They had 2 kids, a boy who was 10 at the time, and a girl who at the time was 8. They were great kids to babysit actually. They got along really well with each other without fighting, and always did what I asked of them without any complaining. Before I launch into what happened, I'm going to give you some background information about this family's home, so you can understand just why I was so freaked out. This house is situated pretty far back in my neighborhood, on this little side street just off the main road that runs through the neighborhood. The houses are in a cul-de-sac, so there's not a lot of traffic down this road at all. Usually, the only people who ever come are mailmen and people who lived in those 3 houses that were there. The street itself was not very long, so there was only space for 3 houses on each side of the street that weren't in the cul-de-sac. Essentially, despite being in a large neighborhood, the street that this house was situated on was very quiet and sparsely populated. If you didn't live in this area yourself, you might not even ever know that this street existed. It was a fall Friday night. I'm pretty sure it was late November, just after Thanksgiving, I believe. I arrived at the home around 6 p.m. The kids were already sitting down eating dinner when I got there. The parents told me they expected to be home around midnight or so. They also made a joke about how the kids had the whole street to themselves, since all the other families that lived there were out of town for Thanksgiving. The parents left, the kids finished eating, and went outside to play in the cul-de-sac area. I remember locking the front door and taking the keys outside with me. The kids played and had fun on their scooters for about an hour. I rushed them back inside after, though. For some reason, I felt really on edge as the kids were playing outside. I chalked this feeling up to knowing we were alone on these streets, since everyone else who would be there was out of town. After the kids finished playing outside, we went to play in the basement instead. I remember locking the front door once we were back inside, and putting the key down on the kitchen counter. I double-checked the front door as well before going downstairs to the basement to join the kids. I was super vigilant about checking the doors because I had watched so many scary movies where a babysitter forgets to lock the door and some crazy murderer bursts into the home. As I was playing with the kids down in the basement, though, I began to get that unsettling feeling again. It didn't quite feel like we were being watched. It was more like that feeling you get when you know something's about to pop out in a scary movie. You're just anticipating it on the edge of your seat, with the tension at its absolute highest. The feeling was stuck on me the entire time we were in that basement, but again, I could only chalk it up to knowing the entire street was empty. The clock struck 10, and it was time for the kids to go to bed. We went to the top floor of the house, where the kids' bedrooms were situated. The house was set up so that when you open the front door and come inside, you're standing in the foyer, with the steps to go up to the top floor directly in front of you. If you're standing in that foyer, you can see all the way up the stairs into their bedroom. So the kids are in the bathroom, brushing their teeth and doing their nightly routine, when all of a sudden, I hear a car pull up into the driveway. I figured maybe it was their parents coming home super early, and I expected to hear the garage door open soon after, but that sound never came. I rushed over to the girl's bedroom window and peeked out her window to see what was going on. There was indeed a car in the driveway, and I could see a figure in the car, but the headlights were turned off, despite it being 10 p.m. and pitch black outside. Okay, well, maybe it was just someone who got lost in the neighborhood and was using the driveway to stop and get their bearings before heading back out on the road. I left the girl's bedroom and headed back to the bathroom where the kids were. All of a sudden, though, I heard a knock on the front door. I turned around and noticed the man now standing there, holding a pizza box. There are 2 long windows on either side of their front door, so I had a very clear view of this guy, and I knew he had a clear view of us as well. Immediately, I felt that familiar, eerie feeling I'd been feeling all night long. I asked both of the kids if one of them had ordered a pizza behind my back for some reason, but they both said no. The kids had always been very honest and wouldn't lie about something like that. They wouldn't even order a pizza without asking me, so I knew they must be being truthful. Normally, I would have gone downstairs to see what this guy wanted myself. Maybe he simply had the wrong address, and I could point him in the right direction. But there was a little voice in my head screaming, "Don't go downstairs. Do not open that door." I could see some inconsistencies even from where I was already. The guy wasn't wearing a uniform that looked like he worked for any pizza company. Normally, they would be doing that, or at least have a hat with a company's logo on it or something, or at least somewhere on the bag. This guy just seemed off. He was in his late 30s or early 40s, and he looked super disheveled. His shirt was wrinkled, his pants were filthy and ripped up, and he had this ratty black baseball cap that was pulled down super far so that his eyes were covered. He was also grinning very aggressively. I thought this guy's teeth might shatter in front of me because how hard he was grinding them together. At this point, the kids noticed him as well and started asking why this random guy was here. I told them to go back to their rooms and lie down so no one could see them. The boy rushed to his room, and I walked the girl to her room. I looked out the window at that car again. I took note that the car didn't have one of those pizza delivery car signs on top either, which all the pizza companies in my town required delivery drivers to have. Now, I was fairly confident of my initial intuition. This guy was not a pizza delivery guy. The girl climbed into bed. I went back out of her room and shut the door and sat down at the top of the stairs so I could keep a close eye on this man. I tried to stay calm so as to not upset the kids, even though I was freaking out on the inside. He was just standing there absolutely still, holding the pizza box in one hand and grinning that teeth-shattering grin. Even though I couldn't see his eyes because of his hat, I could tell from the feeling that he was staring dead at me. Without even trying to check that I wasn't looking anymore, he began to jiggle the door handle while still grinning. I suddenly thanked God I was so psychotic about making sure the front door was always locked. When he noted it was, he stopped jiggling the handle and resumed staring at me. If I was in this situation now, I probably would have called police immediately, but being only 14 and fairly new to babysitting, I was paralyzed with fear. It felt like if I took my eyes off him for just a moment, when I looked back, he would be standing at the base of the stairs. After another 5 minutes of this stare down, he literally started walking backwards off the porch without once breaking eye contact, legitimately just walking backward toward his car while staring daggers at me. I rushed to the parents' bedroom, which also had a view of the driveway. I knelt down in front of the window and peeked out, expecting to see the man climbing back into his car. Instead, the man was nowhere to be seen. His car was still there, though. I returned to my perch at the top of the stairs, half expecting to see him at the door again or worse. He was nowhere to be seen. After about 30 minutes, I heard a car start up outside. I ran back to the parents' room, knelt down out of sight again, and noticed the car and the driver. The man was sitting in the driver's seat, still grinding his teeth. He also didn't turn the headlights on. He shifted in reverse and began silently backing out of the driveway, grinding his teeth the entire time. Just before he drove off, he turned his head, and I swear to God he made direct eye contact with me. I still couldn't see his eyes because of his hat, but it was so disturbing to me. He shouldn't know where I was inside that house. The parents' bedroom was the farthest window to the right. The lights in the room were off, and I was kneeling down as well. He didn't spend any time scanning the windows either. His head just snapped exactly to where I was. It was like he could sense I was looking at him. After I had time to calm myself down and collect myself, I started replaying what had just happened in my head and came to the following conclusions. 1. The guy was obviously not a pizza delivery guy. 2. Those 20 minutes or so that elapsed between when he walked backwards off the porch and to when he got back into his car were probably spent walking around the whole house checking all the doors and windows to gain entry. He clearly had malicious intent. Maybe he wanted to rob the house, or maybe he wanted to do something sinister to me and the kids. Either way, this guy was some bad news. I'm glad I trusted the voice in my head. I think he probably just found some random pizza box outside and tried to pose as a delivery guy to get me to open the door for him. There are still parts of the story that are confusing to me, though. If he really wanted to get inside, why didn't he just grab a rock or a brick or something and throw it through the big window? I mean, I'm very glad he didn't, obviously. But I just thought it was a bit odd that he'd check the doorknobs and then give up immediately after discovering they were locked. Maybe he felt like that would make too much noise or something. Why did he walk backwards off the porch? To preserve eye contact? To intimidate me? Who exactly was this guy? I wonder if that feeling I felt earlier in the night was because he'd been watching us the entire time. Why did he pick that house specifically, given it was on a secluded street that almost no one would have known was there? There were 50 or so other houses you had to pass to even get to this one. And it's not like the area I live in is super affluent either. I don't know, maybe he was just on drugs or some crazy vagrant. This was about 6 months ago, in the summer in the southern hemisphere. Here, I tend to order a fair bit of pizza, since hunger is a thing. Pizza is pretty much my only option for delivery, and since I don't have a car, I can't drive to get something myself. I'm the kind of girl who doesn't wear pants if I don't have to. Even if the weather's 25 degrees, no pants for me. I have one pair of shorts that I love to wear, but I only ever wear it around the house. Obviously, I put those on, as I was expecting a pizza delivery person, and I couldn't exactly just open the door in my underwear. I opened the door and accepted the pizza, and began to eat my dinner by the television. Not too long into my meal, though, I got a message on my phone. I've deleted the messages since, of course, but in the first message, this sender called me by my name. That was pretty strange, as anyone who knew me referred to me by my nickname. They asked if I was home alone, with a winking face. Okay, well, this was pretty creepy. Who exactly was this person? Between me asking who on earth this could be, and how they'd gotten my number, probably a mistake on my part, they began to describe exactly what I was wearing. I started to get a horrible sinking feeling. This person had my number, my name, and knew exactly how I was dressed. I realized the only way they could possibly know this is if they were the guy who just delivered my pizza. I had to use my name and number to order, and if that was the case, this person also knew where I lived. I put the number into Google and checked the first few results that came up. I saw the person was a local, and I had actually seen this person around before as well. Realizing they were in my part of town was the worst part, as they were in the perfect position to stalk, harass me, or continue to be creepy. I drew up all the blinds, crawled into bed, and pretty much made myself into a blanket burrito. I stayed as still as I could for a few hours. I was scared out of my wits. They did keep trying to contact me over the next few days, but luckily I didn't hear from the person again after threatening them with police action. In the spirit of Halloween, I'll share an incident that happened to me last October. It was 10 a.m. on a weekday, and I had the day off. So, I decided to go to the grocery store and get some pumpkins to carve. I did my shopping with no problems, and didn't notice anything off, since it was earlier in the day and the other shoppers were all elderly. I didn't suspect anything would be either. I bought 3 large pumpkins and had them in a cart to put in the trunk of my car. As I was putting the first large pumpkin inside, holding it with one arm and opening the trunk with the other, with my back to the parking lot, I felt someone tug the pumpkin out of my arm backwards. I spun around right away and threw that pumpkin in the process, only to see 2 men now directly behind me. I'm a very small woman, so immediately I felt in danger. The one man, who I assume must be the one who first grabbed at me, made an attempt to scream something at me in a language I didn't understand. He grabbed me once again. I pushed the cart with the remaining pumpkins at the 2 men as hard as I could and hopped in my car to lock the doors and drive away. As soon as I'd gotten the car going, the 2 men jumped into a white brand new Dodge Charger with temp plates and sped out of the parking lot right after me. The street we pulled out onto was a busy 4-lane business district. You couldn't safely speed through this. That didn't matter to them though, as they weaved in and out of traffic to try and run me off the road. Their driving was so erratic that another driver even attempted to box the Charger in themselves. It didn't matter much anyway. They simply went into oncoming traffic to follow me. Meanwhile, I threw on my left turn signal and made a quick turn into a donut and coffee chain I regularly frequented. Next to this coffee chain was a pizza shop that was not yet open. I noticed the Charger had pulled into the pizza chain and was waiting for me to pull out of the coffee chain parking lot. I frantically told the employee what was going on through the drive-thru window while I ordered a snack. Really, I was just waiting in the drive-thru because I didn't want to pull out yet. The coffee chain knew me very well, and on this day, the manager went above and beyond the call of duty. She called the police for me, who told her to have me pull around to the window. She did so knowing I would be in full view of the charger. Because of this, she came outside to stand in between us with the biggest rolling pin I'd ever seen in my life. She stared those men down like my own mother would have. The cops came swiftly and took statements from all of us. The charger, surprisingly, was still there. The police searched it. One officer told me they'd pulled tarp and rope from the trunk and were now treating this as a trafficking attempt or something. Both men refused to answer any questions and were promptly arrested. I don't know for sure what their intent was, but I live in a sanctuary city, mostly with people from Nepal or Bhutan, and I've never had a scary issue before. I love my neighborhood and the people in it, but I didn't recognize these men, nor their car frequenting the neighborhood ever before. That day, I bought everyone working at that coffee chain a gift certificate for a nice fancy massage as a thank you for protecting me. I still tip them every morning with extra, even a year later. I live in a city in central Ohio that has a fairly big college I live next to. I actually attended a different college than the one I mentioned though, and had to make a 20-minute drive from the city to that college. I also worked nights as a pizza delivery man in the city and surrounding suburbs. One night, I had an order in the town where the college I go to is located, which is a smaller suburban city northwest of where I actually live. This call occurred during what my coworkers and I referred to as the dead hour, which is just before the shop closed at 1 o'clock in the morning. I begrudgingly took the pizza, hopped in the car, and plugged the address into the GPS. As I did so, I noticed that this house was located off a back road in what looked to be an absolutely abandoned area. Not thinking too much of this though, I drove up Route 315 I-70 East and exited. After passing through downtown, the cemetery, and the college, I drove through some subdevelopments and then onto an even smaller road, at the end of which the house was located. The GPS notified me that I had arrived at my destination, but to my surprise, as I looked on, the house was completely boarded up. I noticed there was a small shed in the back of the house that had a tiny window, and there was a flickering light in that window. At this point, almost every red flag was going off in my head. Still though, I knew my hard-ass boss would be pissed if I chickened out from the delivery, so I proceeded toward that mysterious shed. As I approached, I heard some rustling in the bushes next to the driveway. Then I heard a man whisper, "Here they come, Billy. 45, 45!" At that point, a man leapt out of the bushes, and two other men jumped out of the shed. They were all carrying knives and were wearing these long robes and white masks. I immediately took off sprinting and made it back to my car just in time. One of the assailants actually managed to slit my arm with his knife as I escaped. I could see them standing in the middle of the road as I drove away, looking absolutely pissed. I shot out of there down that abandoned road at 90 miles per hour, and I finally arrived back in the shop. When everyone got a good look at my bloodied-up arm, they were shocked. After explaining everything that happened, we contacted the police, and they dispatched a few officers to the house. When they got there, of course the assailants were long gone. They found some strange drug paraphernalia in the shed, some ropes, and a bunch of other strange equipment as well. What they were to be used for, well, let's just say I have a bit of a hunch. I attend a college that's located in one of the poorest cities in Northern California. The campus is relatively safe, since the school employs its own department of public safety. But after the sun sets, it's a good call to just remain indoors. That's when all the townies come out, and they tend to wander into campus somehow or another. Now, about 2 years ago, I was living in an apartment complex on the main part of campus, and I didn't have my own car yet. It was the end of the fall semester, and I was the last person in my apartment of 3 girls to finish taking my finals. Because of this, I was home all alone. I had just gotten back from taking my last exam, and followed my usual routine of dejectedly collapsing into my bed to cry and sleep off the effects of pulling all-nighters. When I finally awoke once more, it was already past 10 p.m., and I was completely starving. Unfortunately, the student grocery store and cafeteria were already closed for the day, and I had nothing in the apartment to eat. I had no car to go get food elsewhere either. I was woefully poking around in my fridge in the hopes I would find something substantial to tide me over, at least until morning. It was at that moment I noticed a Domino's coupon that someone had stuck onto the freezer. My stomach's pathetic cries for sustenance had been answered. I quickly decided there was no shame in ordering a whole pizza plus Cinesticks for myself, because 1, I was feeling ravenous, and 2, the completion of finals demanded a celebration. And plus, if anyone happened to ask, I'd just lie and say I was sharing it with a friend or two, something along those lines. Anyway, I eagerly ordered up my feast for 1 and provided the cashier with my address, apartment, and cell number. I typically never gave out my number to anyone, but I had ordered delivery from this Domino's in the past, and I knew they needed my number to call me once more when they were outside. Those drivers would always get lost trying to navigate through campus, although I can't say I particularly blame them. About 20 minutes later, I got the call. My food was here. For reference, it was close to midnight now. The campus was pretty much dead, since most students had already gone home. The driver told me that he had parked in front of the dorm building that was right across the street from my apartment. I hustled out my apartment and was going down the stairs when I spotted the delivery guy waiting outside his car with my pizza. At that exact moment, my sense of caution kicked in. I slowed down my pace as my brain took in the fact that A, there were no other students out, and B, the lighting was really bad in this spot. Essentially, I'd be walking up to a complete stranger with his car that he still had his engine running right next to him. As I neared the bottom of the steps, I silently hoped he would cross the street and approach me, so I wouldn't have to get anywhere near that area. Well, of course, that didn't happen. I made my way across the street and was finally able to get a good look at him. He was a relatively short Hispanic-looking guy, maybe 5'7" or so. He was in his early 20s, and my nerves were getting bombarded by the creeper vibes he was giving off. I can only compare it to that vibe you get when you're out clubbing and you suddenly spot some guy lurking in the crowd, sporting the slick-back ponytail, sunglasses, and oversized shirt, who just happens to be headed right in your direction. I did my best to appear calm and keep the mood light and friendly. He made some comments about how late it was and how no one else was around. I quickly signed the receipt, gave him my thanks and an awkward smile, and hightailed it out of there as soon as he handed over my food. I could feel him watching me as I climbed the stairs back to my place. Once I got back into my apartment, I locked and chained the door and sat down on the living room couch to calm myself. After a few moments, I shrugged off the situation. Surely I was just being paranoid and my overactive imagination was acting up again. I just turned on the television and was about to take my first bite of the pizza when I got a text from an unknown number. I connected the dots pretty fast and matched the text number to the call I had received earlier from the pizza delivery guy. My initial reaction was shock, since nothing like this had ever happened to me before. That eventually melted away into laughter and disbelief when I considered him calling me sexy and my appearance in that moment. Like I had mentioned earlier, I just woken up from a nap after taking my last final. I was wearing a raggedy pair of sweatpants with a bunch of holes, a loose sweatshirt, and my hair was tied in a messy ponytail. My face was probably greasier than the pizza. Definitely not a pretty picture. The next morning, I got a call from my boyfriend John and casually told him about that pizza delivery driver, who casually signed his name in the text as Phil. I also told him all the events that transpired the previous evening. After sheepishly trying to defend my actions on the basis of poor judgment caused by extreme hunger, John convinced me to report his weirdness to campus police, at least as a precautionary measure. I gave them a call, and an officer stopped by my apartment a few hours later. I relayed my story, He took some pictures of the text messages and wrote down Phil's phone number. The officer then told me he would contact the Dominoes if I wanted him to, but it would most likely result in Phil's termination. So far, I didn't really think the whole situation was that big a deal, honestly. I told the officer I just wanted to make sure that he wouldn't do this to me or anyone else again. At the same time, though, I didn't really think it was bad enough for him to lose his job or anything. The officer started asking questions about how I felt after my encounter. Questions along the lines of, did you feel threatened by Phil? Do you feel safe in your apartment with the knowledge he has both your phone number and your exact address? I began to get a little more scared during the course of my questioning. I had broken out in a cold sweat as my traitorous imagination began conjuring up all sorts of dastardly situations. I ended up giving the officer the go-ahead to pursue my case and contact the Dominoes. About a month later, while I was at home celebrating the holidays, I got a call from my boyfriend. I had left him the keys to my apartment so he could store his bike there and crash in my room while I was away. He told me that he had stopped by my place, but couldn't get in because the keys were not working for some reason. It looked like someone had broken in. There was glass on the floor and a wooden board across my living room window. I was pretty upset, so I called the school the next day to figure out what the hell happened. Housing transferred my call to the public safety department, and the officer I spoke with was only able to tell me that according to the records, a maintenance worker had called them 2 days after I headed home to report that broken window. Public safety had responded by boarding the window and changing the lock when they noticed it had been tampered with. I convinced the officer to let my boyfriend in to check if anything was stolen. Nothing had been moved at all. I knew who did it. It was Phil who tried to pick my lock and broke my window. It scares me even more when I consider the fact that nothing was stolen. My flat-screen TV was right by the window that had been broken, and my boyfriend's fancy road bike was sitting right there in the living room. Why hadn't he stolen anything? His intentions were to break in, maybe to try and get revenge on me, the girl that had cost him his job. Would this still have happened if I had not given the officer permission to pursue the case? I didn't try to spend too much time speculating about what his true intentions were, but whenever I think about it, it still makes my heart race when I think about what could have happened if I'd still been in my apartment around that time. This story took me quite a while to write out, as I'm not much of an author myself, and it's quite painful for me to relay. Hopefully, this will help someone though, as it's something I've wanted to share for quite some time. It involves 2 days in my life that I'd always thought were very fun, but somewhat weird, and how, when I grew up and was told what really happened, they've haunted me ever since. It all started when my dad's business partner came to pick me up from school one day. I knew him as Uncle Todd, and although I wasn't expecting him, I trusted him completely when he told me that my mom and dad were busy and he would be in charge of looking after me for a few days. I remember feeling kind of reluctant to get into his car for some reason. After all, mom and dad hadn't told me anything about this. I didn't really want to be away from them. But then he started promising me ice cream, a Game Boy, all this fun stuff. He also told me mom and dad had said I could watch whatever I wanted on the TV and that I was allowed to stay up until whenever I wanted to. Music to a kid's ears, right? So I got into his car and we drove off to his apartment, stopping to get some ice cream on the way. Todd was serious about the TV thing too, as he pretty much left me in his apartment on my own for hours on end. I remember he seemed to be very stressed out about something. I always assumed it was just grown-up stuff or something like that. I didn't really care much. I had all the Nickelodeon and McDonald's I could ever want. And that's how I spent the first night. It was also weird to me that Uncle Todd's apartment was so small that we both had to sleep in the same room. I still wasn't questioning anything though, because he was such a regular part of my life, and I trusted him completely. The next day, after more McDonald's and a bunch more Nickelodeon, Uncle Todd came back super stressed once again and told me to get into the bathtub. I thought he meant that I could take a bath or whatever, but that's not what he meant. He walked me over to the bathtub and made me get inside without any water in it and without taking my clothes off either. I could then hear him talking into the phone in the other room, trying to keep his voice down. I could still hear, though, how angry and stressed out he seemed to be at the person on the other end. Eventually, he went silent, put the phone down, and went to grab me out of the tub. I remember him putting me back on the bed and telling me he was going to get more McDonald's and ice cream for me. Then, as he went to walk out of the room, he picked up this pokey-looking thing in his hand, obviously to take out to his car. I remember asking him what that was, and he told me it was a thing for getting his car started on cold mornings. It hadn't even been that cold that morning or the morning before, but hey, at that age, grown-ups know best, right? Anyway, a few hours later, he drove me back to my parents' place, and they gave him a present for looking after me while they were gone. My mom and dad seemed really happy to see me, and I was really happy to see them too. They said they missed me, and I missed them a bunch as well. I didn't really think any further into it than that. It was only when I was all grown up that I was finally told what actually happened. You see, Uncle Todd and my dad really were business partners, but my dad was not exactly a good or honest person. He'd actually stolen a bunch of money from their business out from under Todd's nose, and he'd actually tried to rearrange some accounting so Todd wouldn't notice either. But Todd did notice, and he got very angry about this. He told my dad to give it back, or he was going to call the cops. My dad told him he'd already spent the money, and if he called the cops and got him thrown in jail, he was never going to get it back. Pretty scummy, I know, but my dad is generally an awful person all around, so I won't go too far into that. Either way, Todd turned out to be way more of a psycho than my dad figured, because instead of calling the cops and getting him arrested, he came up with another plan to get his money back. That's how he ended up showing at my school and convincing me to get into his car. My dad tried to give Todd all these promises that he'd pay him back and get all squared off, but Todd wouldn't believe him. He wanted his money back and he wanted it soon, so he grabbed me and let my mom and dad sweat it out for a day. He told them that if they didn't give him the money in 24 hours, he was going to kill me. Not exactly the best plan. But like I said, Todd was kinda psycho. He fed me McDonald's, gave me ice cream, and let me watch as much cable as I wanted to keep me from leaving what turned out to be the motel room. That's why, for the longest time, I thought motels were places people actually lived, and not places where people only rented a room for a few days or whatever. Then there's the whole bathtub thing. Todd put me in the bathtub that day and brought an ice pack because he was going to torture me while making my parents listen on the phone. That was what made them finally break, and they ended up selling a bunch of things and doing other shady stuff in order to get 10 grand worth of cash together in the space of a day. When they called to say that they had the money, Todd finally took me back home and grabbed the cash, which I'd thought was a gift for taking care of me, and then we never saw him again. Mom and Dad got a divorce not long after, which was sad, but a few of my friends' parents had gotten divorces too. I knew it was a thing that moms and dads occasionally did. I had no idea it was because of all the stealing and the kidnapping. It was also because Dad basically refused to go to the cops about what happened because he was too scared of going to jail himself. My mom just completely resented him after that. She also told me my dad told her if she tried to press charges against Todd, he was going to tell the cops she was in on the scam or whatever, and she would end up catching charges as well. Sometimes I think she might have actually been part of it, and that's why she didn't go to the cops right away when she found out Todd had taken me. I don't know, a lot about the story doesn't add up, but since I don't see my dad anymore, and my mom is the only member of my immediate family I'm close to, I don't exactly want to confront her about it. So, yeah, that's the story of my super messed up family, and how one of the weirdest, most fun times in my childhood turned out to be something completely horrible and kind of traumatic, honestly. In hindsight, it seems really scary, because I had no idea what was happening. It all seemed completely innocent, but I was minutes away from something out of a living nightmare, with my Uncle Todd doing all kinds of evil stuff to me in that bathtub, making me scream into the phone for my parents to hear. In my sophomore year of high school, a close friend of mine was murdered. Going back, freshman year when I was in homeroom, I became friends with the girl who sat right in front of me. Her name was Deanna Wright. We came from the same neighborhood and both worked at pizza shops a few blocks away. One night, I remember she texted me, asking if I wanted to go do something together. This was way before everyone had unlimited cell phone plans. I had the Nokia that was basically just a brick, and I had to pay for every minute we used to text. If it was short, we could get away with not having to open it, and therefore being charged the 5 cents per minute. She told me she'd had a fight with her mother, and felt like going out and smoking some weed. I had to work and wouldn't be done until close to 1 a.m. Since I needed some gas money, I told her I couldn't blow off work that night, but I might come out and hang out with her afterwards. She grumbled and said okay, and to text her when I was done with work to see where she was at, because she couldn't decide what she was going to do yet. At 1:15, as soon as I got off, I texted her, but I didn't get a reply. No big deal, I thought. Probably she just went to sleep. So Saturday, I text her again. Nothing. Sunday. Nothing. Again, I thought she was probably just grounded. That's why she'd been mad to begin with. She was grounded, went out, got grounded again, left and went out again. That's how it usually went. Monday, though, when I came into school, I heard the teacher make a sudden announcement. Sorry to inform you guys, but Deanna is missing. Her family reported her missing after she left. She went out and never came home, so if you know anything, please contact the police. The teacher said all of this in a despondent tone. My stomach dropped instantly. My fingers tingled. I couldn't believe it. Apparently, that night she ended up hanging out with a guy she'd met working at the pizza shop. Everything was going all right at first. She was a beautiful girl, she was a model, so we all know what he was thinking. We're not sure how things exactly went down, but we know she was drugged, raped, and strangled. Then her vile murderer decided to cut her body into small pieces, put her in a steel drum, and light her on fire. Every day, I think about that night over and over. Should I have gone with her? Would that really have made any difference? Or would he simply have killed us both? Her father was an FBI agent, so it truly goes to show that if someone is evil and wants to kill you, then nothing, and I mean not a single thing, will be able to get in their way. Back when I was in year 10, I went on a school trip to Russia with our school's history society. We all thought it would be the adventure of a lifetime, but it turned out to be a complete nightmare for 2 different reasons. Firstly, we were on our way to our hotel in St. Petersburg, and it was terrible. We were basically on a coach for 36 hours straight, with a stop only every 12 hours or so, where we could get some food and stuff. A trip to one country ended up being a trip through like 7 different ones. But then, almost as soon as we crossed the border over into Russia, some weird stuff started happening. All of a sudden, right at dawn too, so most of the other kids were asleep already, the bus driver started raising his voice with our teacher, who then started to sound really scared. And that's when the beeping started. 2 cars were on either side of the coach, one in front, one in back, and they were flashing their lights and beeping their horns. Our teacher was telling the coach driver, who was a Russian guy, not to pull over just because he was scared of what the guys in the cars were going to do. The coach driver was saying that if he didn't slow down and stop then and there might be a crash. The car in front kept dangerously slowing down, trying to force us to a stop. As we started to slow down, we thought we were about to be kidnapped by the Russian mafia or something. It was honestly really scary. It turned out the guys that actually stopped us turned out to be people sent to warn us of that very thing. Apparently some rumors had been going around that we were being targeted for a kidnapping. The guys who were beeping and honking had been sent as an escort by the hotel to protect us. There was a big argument between our bus driver and the protection guys because they had guns with them. The driver and our teacher didn't want them to be on the bus with guns in front of us kids. In the end, we had no choice but to have them get on though, sharing the bus with us until we got to our hotel in St. Petersburg. The next thing was that when we were in our hotel at night, none of us were allowed to leave our rooms. If anyone did, the guys with guns would shout at us to go back inside immediately. We couldn't exactly understand what they were saying, but it didn't take a genius to work out what they meant. We went out sightseeing for 2 days, with this very same isolation at night. Then, one day, there was a switchover with the security team that was guarding us. All the guys we had come to recognize disappeared, and a new team took over. That night, the bus driver must have come back from going somewhere, and one of the security team challenged him in the hallway. Our teacher told us he tried to explain he was the bus driver, and he was a part of our group, but the security guard who stopped him demanded to see some kind of proof of this. Obviously, he didn't have any other than showing his driver's license and uniform from the company he was from. Then, get this, instead of just letting him go to get to his room, the security guys started beating him up. A few of the kids came out of the rooms to see what was going on and literally saw the security guy beating the life out of this bus driver. The driver then basically disappeared after. We were stuck in the hotel for another day. We were supposed to drive on to Moscow to see some of the sights there, so by the time we got another driver, we were already a day behind. At that point, we got the bad news that we wouldn't be going to Moscow at all. Our teacher had basically arranged for us to go back early. We were all gutted about that, but we also noticed something else. Our teacher seemed to be particularly shaken up about something. We all thought it was the whole battered coach driver situation, but it later turned out to be something else entirely. He didn't tell us what happened until we got back home, as he didn't want to scare us. Then, one day in our history society, the very last one before our exams, he told us what had happened and what the battered coach driver had told him. He gave us a little side note, saying he didn't know this for certain, but one thing was clear. He didn't want to put us in any further danger. The bus driver had told him the guys guarding us were all Russian secret agents or something, and there was never a threat of being kidnapped by the mafia. They were basically sent by the Russian government to keep an eye on us in case we were some sort of spy group in disguise. When he was being beaten up, the driver said one of the agents had called him a traitor who was in bed with the English, and that if he didn't make himself scarce, next time he'd be taken somewhere secret and disposed of. That's why he refused to drive us anywhere else, and why he disappeared soon after. As our teacher said, it could have been the bus driver just being dramatic. Our teacher also confirmed, though, that when the security team had been asked to show credentials, any kind of document or card to confirm they were private security, they refused to show anything. They also refused to tell us any of their names, where they were from, or answer any questions at all. Our teacher said that the whole thing was one of the most unnerving experiences of his life, and it made it all scarier to think that he had to protect us 20-plus kids from the Russian Secret Service. He was terrified they'd just randomly detain us or lock him up and leave us all alone if he didn't do exactly what they told him. The whole thing caused a big drama in our school, and loads of parents of kids who went on the trip were up in arms about how they could put us in such danger. It was definitely the craziest thing that happened to me in all my school years, and that's my scary story about the time we visited Russia. I'm an 18-year-old female living in a small town in Michigan. When this incident took place, I had been working a few hours a week at a small pizzeria. It was in my town, and I had been working there for about a year when my boss decided to go on a vacation. She and her family lived in an apartment below the restaurant, and 2 other apartments were situated above it. In order to get to these apartments, you had to go to the back of the building and down a sketchy set of stairs. There, down a further slope, you would find her door, and stairs leading up to the other apartments above. Beyond that, there was a yard and then some woods. I think it's important to mention that there was absolutely no reason to be behind the restaurant unless you were trying to enter these apartments. Now, I usually worked with my mom because we got stuff done easily together and I hated answering phones. One night though, my mom was feeling ill, so I had to work with another lady. She was very sweet, but not exactly super efficient. This meant I was working a lot harder to keep up, and getting a bit agitated when she told me we needed some Parmesan. I agreed to go grab it from the store just down the road if she promised not to make me answer the phones for the rest of our shift. There was only about 2 hours left anyway, and those were normally slow hours as well, so I didn't think it would really matter that much. As I was getting into my SUV, I saw a man pull into the small parking lot in a beat-up car and park near the back. He was lanky and wearing oil-stained shop clothes, which was and still is totally normal around here. He got out and retrieved a bag from his trunk, then started to head down those back stairs. I knew for sure this guy was not a renter because I'd never seen him before, and the renters frequently ordered pizza. I guessed it was possible he was a friend of one of the renters, but something about this did not seem right. It was around 9:30 at night, and one of the renters was a single mom. The others were two brothers with mental health issues, and they were pretty antisocial to anyone they didn't know. I was getting bad vibes from this man. I grabbed my knife from the center console and tucked it into my sleeve. And call me paranoid, but there'd been a lot of car fires and break-ins around that time, so I was nervous to go anywhere unarmed. It might have been a stupid thing to do, but I genuinely considered my boss and the people that worked there my friends, and I didn't want this guy to hurt any of the renters or steal from any of the apartments either. I decided to sneak up and see what he was doing, just in case he was a man with ill intention. I got out of my car and walked quietly over. There were motion-activated lights, so I could easily see what the man was doing. He was fiddling with this old key ring and seemed to be trying to get into my boss's apartment. "Hey, what are you doing?" I asked loudly so my coworker could hopefully hear me through the open back door. The man was clearly startled. He smiled and told me he worked for my boss's husband and he was there to feed the dog and let it out. His smile was way too creepy though. It was the kind a liar gives when they're trying really hard to convince you. My boss did have a dog, and her husband did own a fabrication shop, so his story seemed to check out on a surface level, but something had me still not convinced. I decided to go get the cheese and check again when I went back. "Okay, well, let me know if you need help with something." I tried to sound as normal as possible, but something was seriously weirding me out here. I hustled at the store and rushed back to work. I'd been gone about 10 minutes, and when I got back, surprisingly, he was already gone. I was still feeling something was off though, and I was feeling bad for the dog who'd been shut in a good portion of the day. I decided to text my boss and let her know what was going on. Fast forward 2 hours, and I was now on my way home. I got to my door when I decided to check Facebook. As I was scrolling downwards, I saw something that made my stomach drop instantly. It was a picture of my boss with her dog at the beach from earlier that very day. I called my boss and then the police to file a report. It turned out the man had been fired by my boss's husband earlier that week for making an inappropriate comment about his underage daughter and repeatedly harassing other female staff. This guy had planned some sort of revenge scheme. Luckily, he didn't know their family had left for vacation. His bag was full of tools and knives. During questioning, he told them the only reason he'd left right away was because he thought I'd stayed behind to watch him. Thankfully, he went to jail soon after, and for a couple of other things he'd been wanted for previously. It still creeps me out to this day, and I hate to think what might have happened if their family had really been home. For my first job, I worked as a pizza delivery driver and dishwasher at a mom-and-pop pizza shop. The shop was within walking distance of my apartment, which I had just gotten alone. The shop was owned by a foreign man, his 2 nephews, and another friend of theirs. I was the only female in the entire building. The owner asked me to change into my work shirt the first day in the walk-in freezer. I declined and put it on in the bathroom instead. He supervised me delivering pizzas and put his arm around my chair, told me to join him and the workers after work for drinks. I politely declined, as I wasn't even old enough to drink. Then he began to ask if I had a boyfriend, which I did at the time. I told him yes, and that he lived in another state. He then offered his worker to sleep on my couch because he didn't have a place to stay. Didn't even consult me. Obviously, I protested and declined. He also told me he knew my boyfriend's name, which I'd never told him before. As time continued to go on, things began to get even weirder. The owner would sometimes take me out back, where there were no cameras, and scold me for not pouring bleach onto the dishes I was washing. I told him that you can't do that, but he didn't seem to care. He would take me out back after my shift and compliment my eyeglasses and tell me how beautiful I was. I would say thanks, hurry away, and drive home. One time, he even came up behind me as I was washing dishes and licked the back of my neck. He then proceeded to tell me that since I lived alone, which I did not inform him of, I should be very careful. He stated he knew the exact layout of my apartment because his friend lived nearby. I told him I had a roommate at the time, which I didn't. He chuckled and told me he knew I was all alone and that he was going to break into my apartment one of these nights and attack me. I was completely stunned. I had 4 deliveries waiting for me to drop them off that night. On my way out the door, his nephew muttered something about me being a girl. I threw the bags into the car, promptly pulled over, and had a panic attack. I dropped all 5 pizzas off and whatever else I was delivering at the very first house I arrived to. I really couldn't give a fuck. I rushed home to my apartment, called my mom, and sat in the kitchen with a hammer for safety. Someone began to knock on my front door. I wasn't brave enough to look out and see who, but I already had a feeling who it was. The pizza shop number then began to call me repeatedly. I'd left my eyeglasses in the shop apparently, and had their pizza bags still. My dad went to the store instead of me, gave them their bags back, and threatened the owner, saying he had no problem going to jail if they continued to bother me. My dad retrieved my glasses. Months later, I ran into that guy's nephew at my college campus, and he proceeded to just stare at me while we passed each other by, and continued to stare at me from then on. After these incidents, I got a huge 100-pound American bulldog to keep me safe. She did so very well until the day she unfortunately passed away. That pizza shop is still open for business, and I'm still living in the same apartment. Needless to say though, I never order pizza from that shop anymore. When I was 10 years old, it was not uncommon for my siblings and I to dig around outside. On this particular day, I was tired out from the day before, and so I decided to stay inside this time. I would occasionally look outside to make sure everyone was okay and doing well. I was a paranoid small child due to some former trauma that I'd experienced when I was much younger. Well, after my third glance outside, I noticed that my cousin and brother were now standing at the end of the gravel driveway, talking to some pizza man, it seemed. I turned to my mother and asked her if we'd ordered pizza, maybe as a surprise or something. Immediately, my mom turned to the door and bolted outside screaming. The sounds of tires screeching could be heard. My mom rushed back inside with my brother, cousin, and sister. After asking what happened, my brother and cousin went on to explain that this random pizza guy, in his late 20s or so, had suddenly pulled up and asked the boys if they wanted some free pizza. Of course, being small kids, they were readily willing to accept such an offer. He told them the pizzas were in the back, and if they wanted them, they would have to climb into his car. That's luckily when my mom ran towards the car, yelling obscenities. Thankfully, whoever it was threatened enough by my mom that he sped off right away. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.